everyone. Welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, the podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters with your questers, Josh and Dan. I am Dan.
I am Josh.
And on today's podcast, we will be discussing all things hematological and maniacal and quizzical, because we're going to talk about the keys of death right after we handle some emails, and actually, our second ever voicemail to our podcast. We are now 100 plus episodes in, second voicemail. Get on it, listeners. We want some more voicemails.
Yes, if you go to our primary podcast page at anchor.fm/EDSG podcast, there is an option for you to leave a voice message for us. We've gotten one previously. It's not required, but it's kind of cool. So somebody just left one for us the other day, and we will listen to that and respond.
Yeah, Tristan was our first. Chris is our second, and he's got basically a question for us about wood skin.
Good afternoon or good evening, or whenever you're recording this. I've got a rules question regarding wood skin. Wood skin says that you make a recovery test, make a wood skin test, and it adds the results to your health rating. Now, when I look under health ratings, it lists 4: unconsciousness rating, death rating, wound threshold, and recovery. It surely can't be adding to recovery, because that would be totally broken. It surely is referring to unconsciousness rating and death rating. But the question is, would it affect wound threshold? I'd appreciate your thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris, for sending that message our way. That is a good question. You are correct in that it does not apply to recovery, because that would be absolutely broken.
Very broken.
But wood skin does not modify wound threshold. The numbers that you get as a result of wood skin only modify unconsciousness and death ratings. And I can understand now the confusion on how the text is written. For the sake of simplicity, I think when I was editing that for the 4th edition release, I thought saying health ratings would be clearer, and was working under the assumption, people who are reading this know what I mean. Because it's always worked by affecting death and unconsciousness ratings. Why would it affect anything else? And changing the language actually brings in a level of ambiguity that is not desired. So
yeah. I did check the errata.
Is it in the errata?
It's not. It does not clarify anything in the errata.
We should add that to the errata to clarify that. So no, that is a good question based on the actual text that is there. And it is one of those things where I sort of hear the question and I go, oh yeah, I can understand now why you might be confused by that.
Yeah, the proper game master would go by spirit of the law, not letter of the law.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not... See, now I'm curious. I'm going to go back to the 1st edition.
And see if it has anything to say about it.
Yeah. The original text of Woodskin, talking about 1st edition book here, did specify death and unconsciousness rating. And I thought that I was making things easier by changing the text for 4th edition, and did not, in fact, make things easier. So my apologies. And I will get that in the errata before this episode goes up.
There we are. Thank you for that one, actually. You brought up a very good point. So congratulations, you've now changed the text of Earthdawn on your own. Next up, we have an email from William. Insert proper temporal greetings here. I've been listening for a few weeks, binging episodes while I work, and I've got a couple of other sources for flavor of the horror stalker, among other things. So everyone get in the mindset of your horror stalker if you've got a character. The first is Warhammer 40k's Inquisition. The Inquisitors of the Imperium are the protectors of mankind in the grim darkness. They understand that they must do what others will not, and in many cases, sacrifice themselves, and others, to fight the foe. One recurring theme is that they will either die fighting the foe, or become the foe by living long enough to be corrupted. And I'm going to insert here, either you play the hero, or you live long enough to become the villain. That's just a phrase I picked up along the way.
Yeah, you picked that up from Batman.
Exactly. The second is Hunter, the Reckoning, from the World of Darkness. As the individual hunters progress in power, they tend to get more obsessed with their crusade against the things that go bump in the night.
Those are both very cool references. Thank you for bringing them up.
Absolutely.
I am more familiar with Hunter than I am with Warhammer 40K. Warhammer, my knowledge of that is largely just from cultural exposure.
Fair.
I never played it, but I just kind of know about it because there are, of course, memes and all sorts of stuff about it. I played a little bit of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and the system's fine, but it's not quite the same as 40K.
Fair enough. Furthermore, regarding versatility, can a human learn a weaponsmith's version of Craftsman or the Troubadour's Entertainer?
Technically, according to the letter of the rules, I believe it is possible. I would check. I'm gonna have to go check now. I would say yes, unless there is already text within the various rules for versatility that says it cannot be used to learn free talents. You can't use versatility to pick up the free talent versions of spell matrices from magicians, for example.
Fair.
And so that restriction might also apply to Craftsman and Entertainer. And if that's the case, then no.
Fair.
There are a bunch of places in the text where that might appear. So that might be the case. If it is not specifically prohibited in that way, you could allow it, but I would personally feel that because you need to be trained by someone in order to learn a talent under versatility, I would think that weaponsmiths and troubadours would be very, very reluctant to teach those magical abilities to someone who is not a follower of the discipline. Really what those free talents are for weaponsmiths and troubadours is a way to make more explicit something that previously had been largely covered under half magic for them. These are things that they should be able to do by virtue of being what they are. And so I'm personally against it. I don't like it as an idea. The idea of the free talents is a good one in terms of how things pick up, but if it's not explicitly stated otherwise at some point in the text, that versatility cannot be used to pick up what somebody has as a free talent. So you couldn't use it to pick up call missile from the archer.
Or navigation from the scout.
Yeah, the only one that's kind of blurry on that line is the danger sense that Thief gets for free. But that's also available as a non-free talent through the Scout.
Yeah, Scout has that.
And maybe one or two other disciplines might have it as an option. So it is possible to kind of pick up other ways. Each table needs to ultimately make the call, but my recommendation would be no, those two are not allowed to be picked up under versatility. They are just too broad and too fundamental to the nature of the disciplines to which they are attached.
Fair. All right. The last part of William's email. Anyway, thank you both for your work on the podcast. I'm in the process of getting my group on board to give 4th edition an honest go, and the Earthdawn Survival Guide has been an awesome resource for wrapping my head around the lore and setting. Have an awesome evening and safe travels. William?
Thank you, William. Yes. I hope you get them on board. Slight tangent here, speaking of that. I went and bought new furniture for my living room this past weekend.
Okay.
And in the course of doing so, provided my email address to the person there that was helping us fill out the paperwork and whatnot.
Yes.
That email address being loremerchant@gmail.com. I have had that address for years and years, and lore merchant is a thing for me.
Yeah.
And her response to that was lore. I'm like, yeah. And I do writing and development for role-playing games. She's like, oh, we just started playing D&D. I'm like, that's awesome.
Yes. The more the merrier. Come join in.
Yeah. It's not like, oh, well, let me sell you on this other game. But this person who was probably in her around 30, give or take, one way or another was like, oh yeah, we just started doing this. And it's like, finally, like we've been kind of wanting to do it for a while and finally found somebody who would like run the game for us. And I'm like, that's awesome. I love hearing that. Go you.
I'll take new people.
Yeah.
Bring them all in.
Love like encountering folks in the wild and somebody who was like, I've sold furniture to a lot of people and that's probably like the coolest thing I've ever come across from somebody that I've learned about somebody that I've sold furniture to. I'm like, well, thank you.
We'll take that.
That's very cool.
Wasn't even there. I'll take it. Last email we have is from Jesse. Dear Questors, Dan and Josh. That's how you address us. First, I'd like to say how much I appreciate the podcast and the work you put into it. Thank you both so much. Second, I was re-listening to one of Dan's readings of the Legends of Barsaive this morning, the Horror Storm, and noted that according to this legend, Tisawara, the city in Landis, survived the Scourge. Yet on the current maps, it is listed as ruined. I don't recall any information about a city in Landis falling after the Scourge was over, though. Maybe I missed some bit of lore somewhere along the way. Do either of you have any insights? Is this one of those nuggets that is left for GMs to use as needed? Best, Jesse, a.k.a. Falal Katan Vros.
So we did a little bit of research on this because this is an interesting question.
Yeah, I love this.
I am not as familiar off the top of my head with the little bits of setting lore and detail that are in the Legends books. I kind of know broadly what the various legends are about, but I could not tell you this city was originally mentioned in this legend.
Yeah.
So I was not aware that Tisawara had appeared prior to its mention in Carafad, which was kind of where it first shows up and where its information as it being destroyed enters the canon at that point. Yeah. Because the information that's presented about Landis in the Carafad source book, there's not a lot of it, but one of the things that's mentioned, and it's possible that it may have been mentioned earlier, but it's like, this is where my awareness of it comes in, is that the three largest settlements, the three largest citadels of Landis were all ruined. And Tisawara was one of them.
Yeah.
I was not aware that the city name had appeared previously in that particular legend. And we went back and we looked at the legend. And all indications according to the story there is that the city survived the Scourge and the elemental dome protecting it was taken down. And the game information section at the back of that book doesn't talk about the city at all. It just talks about
the crystal.
The crystal and the person that might have left with the crystal and stuff like that.
Yeah, doesn't mention the city at all. So you're right. It was the legend was all about the crystal and the people. Tisawara happened to be a footnote in that, or just the setting of that. Didn't really carry forward.
Right. And so we didn't find anything else in any subsequent books that mentioned the city again. So it appears once in that legend, and then it shows up again in the Carafad source book a few years later in terms of publishing history.
Yeah.
I don't know for sure, and it's possible that upon hearing this, Lou might offer a little bit of insight if he can recall anything about it, is that when the information was sort of being prepped for Landis for the Carafad book, they pulled the name for one of the major cares from that previous material. That there was a note or that somebody had done a little bit of digging and found this mention of, oh, this was a notable settlement or city in Landis, and dropped it in, but didn't really do anything to connect its current state as a ruin to what was described in that legend. So, yeah. I don't know. That may be something to consider as a GM to kind of fill in as they want.
Yeah.
That's a great catch. That's a little bit of lore discrepancy, perhaps.
I'd say feel free to play around with Tisawara all you want, because, again, it's one account that it opened up after the Scourge, and the current account of it's a ruined care.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we do, and I'm finding that I am having to do this a little bit with the work that's being developed for the Europa sourcebook that I'm working on is going back to the previous published material that references Europa or the Aras Sea or things right around there and seeing what was said before, and if there are contradictions or if there are questions that come up as a result of that, trying to figure out a way to square that circle to perhaps either resolve the differences between them or decide, well, this is what we're going to go with or whatever. And in some cases, maybe we'll just come up with, we don't have an answer and there are a couple of different ideas and we'll, leave it for the future.
Y'all pick the best one you like. So very fair. Thank you, one and all, for your emails. If you have any questions for us, because we love answering all these, it does bring up fantastic discussions, and occasionally we'll change the text or these be added to the errata. Please reach out to us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail, because we'll take that.
You can absolutely do that.
Totally. Be part of the show yourself instead of having me read your lines for you, which I don't mind talking. On to the hematological and maniacal part of our episode this evening. We actually might want to put a warning on this one because we're going to talk about some very dark stuff here. This is not going to be a pleasant episode. We're talking about the keys of death. Essentially, worshiping death as the 13th passion. This is a cult, and we do not use that word lightly. This is a cult.
In this particular case, we absolutely do not use that word lightly.
No, not anyway. Because this cult is absolutely single-mindedly devoted to the art of murder. Or for those Stephen King fans, Red Rum.
Yes. The basic premise behind this group is the belief that if enough name-giver blood is spilled on the land of Barsaive, the prison that is currently holding death will be unlocked, and death will be released and free once more. Going back to the belief that death was imprisoned by the passions beneath death's sea.
Yes.
Hence its fiery condition and that sort of thing.
This is a very dangerous cult because they are, as I said, single-mindedly devoted to murder and the spilling of blood. And really, that's the whole thing. Murder is one thing. Killing is another thing. Killing people with poisons is something else entirely. They are really about spilling as much blood as possible from victims onto the earth. Because it doesn't have, if it's on a wood floor or a stone floor or a second-story floor, it doesn't really matter. It has to touch the actual land of Barsaive itself in the province, and that's what they're there for. So essentially, in the essay, the wonderful essay in the Secret Societies of Barsaive book, it is mentioned that they are essentially questors of death because they do worship death as the 13th passion. They don't get any questor powers for it because death really can't provide them any questor powers, but this is how they see death, as the 13th passion.
It is called out by the Theran agent that compiled this report. It's surprising in a way that this cult, these worshippers of death, are able to prosper as they have.
Yeah.
Because their patron is not actively involved in pushing them to do these things. Whereas the passions, as they are understood by the residents of Thera and Barsaive, are actual powerful spiritual beings of some sort that involve themselves in people's lives and actually communicate with or appear to their questors and grant them powers and all that sort of thing. That doesn't happen with the Keys of Death, and yet they are having quite a bit of success as a cult, as a secret society, as a murderous organization.
Yeah.
Above and beyond, like, even what other non-passion worshipping cults, like Naaman's Hand, for example, would be able to do in terms of membership.
Exactly. So not that Thera is under any delusions about what the Keys of Death are or do, because Thera has used this cult before. They're pretty easy to employ when you give them what they want, which is, by the way, we're going to pay you a little bit of money to go kill somebody we want killed. So there you are. So Thera is not averse to using the Keys of Death. They do, in the essay, say that they're probably a little big for their britches and would need to be tamped out soon enough once Thera has made good use of them. But they do hire them to take care of people that are in Thera's way, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah, the agent does point out that while the Keys of Death are very good at what they do, and what they do is killing people, they can be a little bit difficult to control compared to more traditional assassins, because more traditional assassins do it for the money, whereas the Keys of Death do it in service of their beliefs. And while it's not explicitly said, the intention there is that fanatics and true believers can bring their own baggage and problems to a situation that you could just as easily find their knives turned on you, and there's not necessarily any way for you to buy them off.
Yeah, they'll make things worse, not better. Usually worse in this case. The interesting thing about this that we get from the essay is that this cult predates the Scourge by several centuries, going almost as far back, if not further back, than the Orichalcum Wars. The history's a little fuzzy on that one. And that other similar cults do exist in other areas that this agent has found out, including Vasgothia. So I'm curious if there's a little tidbit of this cult in the Vasgothia book upcoming.
I cannot say.
And there you have it, folks. Straight from the horse's mouth, per se.
Yeah, but I mean, that's not a huge surprise. Even within actual recorded history, death has been a figure to some greater or lesser extent in human cultural development and legend and myth and religious belief.
Yes.
Over the course of time, the characterization of which and the depiction of which and its relationship to the culture varies greatly depending upon the culture in question. And so finding death-related cults within other parts of the lands that Therans have visited doesn't surprise me.
No.
What is again called out here in the essay is that those beliefs in other areas are not as strong or not as fervent or not as potentially wide-ranging as the Keys of Death, and that is probably as a result of the Barsaivian proximity to Death's Sea.
Yes.
You know, that location where, according to legend, Death was imprisoned.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, some discussion of, because of the Scourge and all of the various stuff that's associated with that, that probably doesn't help matters either in terms of supporting their morbid ideas.
Probably not. You know, he's speculating, and that's fine. Speculate all you want. So, the legend of Death's imprisonment, the Keys of Death kind of agree with the first half of. The second half is where they kind of part ways. So, the first half is that the passions tricked Death to go recover a life uncounted, the coin that Shirolus imbued with his greed, and Astandar imbued with his desire, and they covered it in a cloak of Eupandal's fire from his forge, and they sunk it to the bottom of the sea and tricked Death into going after it. And then, that's when they imprisoned him. Okay, nobody disagrees about that part. The cult believes that the other passions were jealous of Death because Death has more power and is older, and that Death is the first passion. Yes.
Yeah, before you continue with that, we should explain how this is different, is that most Barsaivians believe, and most people who are aware of this legend believe, that the reason that Death was imprisoned was out of a love of name givers and the passions desiring to protect them from Death.
Yes. Fair.
Now we come to how the Keys of Death differ from that, which is not that they were trying to protect people, but that they were jealous of Death's power because Death was older and stuff.
Yeah, and he was the first passion. And they also believe that the other passions are deceitful and treacherous, and that death is pure because he does not hide his intention or his true purpose. The other passions do. So that's where they kind of part ways on their belief system there.
There's an interesting bit as well kind of tied to that, which is the idea that the undead, cadaver men, spectral dancers, various other things like that, did not exist prior to death being imprisoned, and that those undead are the result of name givers clinging to emotions associated with the passions strongly enough to defy death's grasp. Because death is so powerful that even imprisoned, death is able to capture people eventually.
Mm-hmm. It's an eventuality, like, taxes. There's the whole phrase, death and taxes. One of those
but
things.
I think that's a really neat idea.
Yeah.
This doesn't necessarily apply to all undead because you've still got your more mindless stuff. Mm-hmm. But spectral dancers and cadaver men and ghouls, all of them in one way or another could be viewed as embodying particular desires or hungers or whatever, just dialed up to the point where that is all that they are. That emotion is strong enough to allow the soul to continue animating the body after they should have passed on.
Yeah, shuffled off their mortal coil.
References and connections, so forth. It does mention that the Keys of Death do not worship the undead. They consider them abominations because they are thwarting the true proper cycle of things and are destroyed whenever possible because those spirits need to be returned to their rightful place.
Yeah. So they don't like anybody who's undead either. That's it. So I was telling my wife about this the whole cult, and my wife is a huge person for the letter of the law, because she says, for Sleeping Beauty, here's the rule, how to get her out of this prison that she's in. So for death, the passions gave us the rule, and in the Secret Society's book, it's that the passions chanted for their ritual magic, by fire and blood you are bound. So by fire and blood you will be freed. So this is why the cult believes if they spill enough blood on Barsaivian soil, it will unlock death from his prison. However, the longer version of that is actually, I found this in the Game Master's Compendium from the Red Brick edition. Low Coast spoke the spell of binding. By fire and blood you are bound. By blood and fire you may be freed. Each drop of name-giver blood shed upon the land will wear away at your shackles as water wears away stone. So, a little bit longer there.
That must have been pulled from another reference of the story, because I think the binding of death appears not only here. Mm-hmm. It might be from it might be from the Barsaive box set, from the Adventurer's Guide to Barsaive, or one of those other earlier books that might have another version of the legend, much like the origin story, the dragon creation myth, appears both in the horrors book, and a slightly different version appears in the dragons book.
Of course.
So it might be something like that thing from the compendium was pulled from another version of the legend that appears in another book.
Totally. So my wife's point was, fine, all the blood spilled on Barsaivian soil will eventually unlock Death's cage, his prison. But the phrase is, by blood and fire you may be freed. So the cult is not actually including anything about fire. So this might be a fool's errand for this cult, but just saying, if they followed the recipe, they'd be all set. So if you are ever asked by a member of the Keys of Death to join their cult, be careful. If you say yes, you kind of know what's in store for you. If you say no and you refuse, they'll just kill you outright, because first rule of Keys of Death, we don't talk about the Keys of Death. It's a secret cult.
Yeah. The Keys of Death do not just go around murdering random people willy-nilly. although they might give that impression, they actually prefer to target people that they feel in some way are mocking or resisting the power of death or defying the power of death in some capacity.
Yes.
So healers and physicians would be like a popular target.
Other questors.
Questors of other passions especially.
Oh, yes.
Because they serve those who bound death. Their blood is especially potent as symbolically in terms of weakening death's shackles by slaying those who serve his captors.
Yes. And any dealers of healing, anybody who sells potions or things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, anybody who deals in magic that defies death in some way, they don't like that because it's not necessarily just that it is only the murders that we perform in the service of death that will weaken him. It is just people passing on as they are intended to in general. It's just that we're going to also do things to try and speed that process along.
Yes. But for themselves, the Keys of Death, they also feel that Death, the Passion, will spare his questors themselves as a reward for releasing him from this prison. So they have a small mindset about that as well. But yes, most of the Keys of Death are adepts. They are highly trained, and they are actual assassins for hire. They don't just, like to Josh's point, they're not just serial killers out there taking care of whoever they want. They have specific targets. They're hired. They do certain things. They wear specific garb to do so, to hide their identity, because they're doing it all in death's service.
There's a particularly ritualistic aspect to the way that they do things, and something that you might draw inspiration from when you're dealing with members of this cult would be to look at pop culture depictions of serial killers, particularly like within the horror movie genre.
Yes.
Looking at those movies in particular that try and, as ham-fistedly as they sometimes might, getting into the psychology of how somebody is a serial killer, looking at the more cultured, intelligent, motivated, for lack of a better term, rationalistic type of serial killer who has a very particular set of beliefs that is going through them, more the Hannibal Lecter style of serial killer as opposed to the Jason Voorhees style. They kill for a reason. Now, generally speaking, if you actually get into it, serial killers tend not to be the like super cultured, intelligent masterminds that you see depicted in media.
Yeah.
But looking at the pop culture inspirations of such things, looking at, say, Jigsaw from the Saw series, who has a particular motivation and reason for why he is doing what he is doing.
Yes.
As opposed to, you know, Jason Voorhees, who is just kind of an animated corpse that just really likes killing.
Yeah.
Even Freddy Krueger in his own way has some kind of psychology there in that he likes the game or, you know, sort of tormenting his victims in a way beforehand, although there's not quite as much sort of as a ritualistic aspect of things there. But that's something that you could look at with this cult as a game master trying to understand what is motivating them and how that might have them do what they do.
Since this is a secret cult, they do have to operate, of course, in very much secret because you really can't pledge allegiance to a passion of death in the open. You're going to be kind of, you know, ostracized for that. So they keep this very much a secret. So really, this could be anybody your player characters are involved with, and they can be, you know, nice as sunshine and sweet as rain one day, and then the next day they find out, holy cow, this person I have been dealing, this NPC I'm dealing with now is actually part of the Keys of Death. So that's an interesting thing there. So when they are doing their dirty deeds, they have this, they've actually, each member of the Keys of Death has created their own death robes. And this is a interesting thing about their pattern item. It's part of the group pattern. And so it imbues them while they're wearing it with these special abilities that other group pattern items do, but they're not actually doing any of the other ritualistic things to make the group pattern happen. So the author of the essay is still trying to figure out exactly how that works. Any insights?
Not really. This is another case similar to the stones that the Fellowship of Night had, those bits that were parts of the life rock.
Yeah.
Where it's kind of treated as a group pattern item, but does not necessarily behave exactly in the way that the rules for player character group pattern items work. For me, as a GM, as a storyteller, I have no problem with the concept of the similarity of beliefs and the, at least on a certain level, the similarity of the rituals and practices of this cult doing similar things, however that might have been spread or originally inspired or anything like that, that in a sense develops its own magic, that the group pattern that has resulted from the Keys of Death existing as a organization has resulted in this kind of magical pattern that allows those practitioners to draw from it consciously or not, and to, as a result, do potentially weird things that, because they're associated with a murderous death cult, a lot of people don't get a lot of opportunity to study particularly closely, and so don't understand particularly well.
Yeah, fair enough. But one last point to make real quick before we wrap things up here. The Keys of Death, just so you know, are also not only masterful and feared assassins, but they are experts in poisons, using them, selling them, and whatnot. And just so you know, they'll poison people that actually paralyze their victim so they can take care of the ritualistic blood spilling later. So it's not that they're averse to poisons. Poisons are helpful to them.
Yes, they do have a unique poison that only they have called Death's Tears. And what it does is it makes the victim weep blood. And so it kills them in that way, but as a result, because that death involves the blood spilling from their orifices, that kind of satisfies the ritualistic requirements of the blood spilling on the ground. Very unpleasant death if you think of stuff like hemorrhagic fevers and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's messy and unpleasant.
I'm just reminded of the scene in Firefly. I forget the episode, but it's where the 2x2 Hands of Blue men finally show up to take River prisoner. And they have a little electronic device that causes bleeding from the eyes and so forth. So a little visual representation. Yeah. So there are easy ways to kind of use the Keys of Death in any campaign you're running. Josh, suggestions?
There were a couple of different things that you could do. One, you could use them and lean into them as the hired assassin serial killer archetype, because while they do have this sort of ritualistic and ultimate long-term goal of killing people, they will accept jobs where they kill people for various reasons. It's just that because of their beliefs, you can't always trust that they will not turn those things on you given the opportunity. But to use them as agents or somebody that was hired by somebody else to kill a rival or political target or various other things. So you could absolutely use them as the sort of master assassin archetype that is merely a link in the chain to getting to the perpetrator who hired them to off their rival or whatever. That's one possibility. And in that case, they largely just operate as this kind of shadowy organization that is a little weird, but otherwise are just skilled assassins. The other possibility is to move into their activity as a cult that has a particular goal and to have them be the agents of danger in a particular scenario where perhaps an individual or multiple individuals are being targeted, and the players in the course of investigating find this cult that is behind it and take action to interfere with the plot or stop them. Generally, best served as a kind of Seven style, like the movie Seven, mystery where you've got multiple victims and they kind of need to piece together the connections, taking inspiration from serial killer crime dramas kinds of things, where you are investigating mysteries and whatnot. The one thing that I would advise against is tying the Keys of Death and the history of the Keys of Death to any kind of horror manipulation or inspiration, only because that feels too easy.
Yeah.
And I don't like putting the horrors behind every bad thing that people do in the setting.
Yeah.
There are plenty of examples of people just doing bad things because they have messed up beliefs, and you don't necessarily need to have the horrors behind all of it.
No.
That said, I could see a clever horror potentially manipulating the Keys of Death to cause problems in an area that they might want to take advantage of or feed off of in some capacity. I just feel like that association between the two is too easy.
Yeah, I agree. Let the Keys of Death be their own thing and let the horrors do their own thing. Not that one couldn't manipulate the other, but yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing kind of along those lines in terms of the caution and the essay, the game information section of the Keys of Death does say the toughest part about handling the Keys of Death is trying to avoid them simply becoming just like generic assassins.
Yeah.
That you kind of need to be a little bit careful in terms of how you deal with them, because if you're not, in some sense, taking advantage of their beliefs and their history and why they are doing what they're doing in some capacity, there's not much sense in using them as an actual cult.
Yeah.
You might as well just have them as generic assassins that jump out of the shadows and stab people. They have lasted as an organization, as a cult for a very long time, and their beliefs, they know, are not popular or well looked upon by the vast majority of people, and so they will be subtle, and they will be quiet, and they will not advertise themselves.
Yeah.
Perhaps, again, lean into the mystery investigation, serial killer drama kind of thing, trying to figure out who the perpetrator is, or perhaps perpetrators are. For an off-the-wall example, look at the movie Hot Fuzz, which is an amazing movie.
Yeah.
And a comedy, but also involves a secret cult that is at the heart of this idyllic little town. Obviously, they are not worshiping death to have him be released and reward them for their service, but it is still a dark organization that is doing these things because of their beliefs. And so perhaps having the characters get involved with a place where you're not dealing with a single murderer, where you're dealing with an actual community that is a cult. The entire community, or a significant portion of the community, is the cult. And the players ending up in a situation where they need to be careful and paranoid about who could possibly be in the service of this cult, because when they're acting in the service, they are wearing their robes and they are masked, and there's a lot of
secrecy
and things like that could be used as inspiration.
Totally. It's fun to speculate about how to use these, because it's going to be a mystery to solve. It should be a surprise at the end, because they're putting on airs that they're not part of this cult, but they really, really are. And so the best way to do that is to have the characters you're running interact with this person and then pull the wool over their eyes the entire time. And then at the end, have them be revealed and get this huge shock and surprise to your player characters.
I like the adventure idea that is included in here as well.
Oh, yes.
I think it's a really clever twist. Starts off as being presented as the Keys of Death have started operating, but the player characters actually get hired by a member of the Keys who is pretty sure it's actually not them,
Yeah.
and is hiring them to find the real killers because the attention that the death or deaths have drawn, they don't like it.
No.
And so the player characters investigate and discover who is actually behind the killings. The keys of death are being framed because they're hoping to push the keys of death into taking a certain action.
Yes.
And I kind of like that.
Double twist.
That double twist, it combines like the serial killer mystery thing with a little bit of the political spy drama. I mean, it is set obviously back pre-Second War, and so there's a lot more Theran Thrall Cold War type stuff that's going on with it, but I really like the mixing of genres and the twists that are involved in that. And it could be that the player characters do everything and never learn that the keys of death are actually the ones who hired them to clear their name of a killing.
If you do it just right, that'd be fun too. So if you have any questions for us on the keys of death, or you want to hear us talk about more about the keys of death, because we could seriously cover a whole lot more ground on speculation about these guys. However, this is very mature themes. It's not just about maybe killing an NPC here or there. They are specifically about the spilling of blood. So hence the hematological reference at the beginning of the episode. This is a careful subject matter to blend into your fictional role-playing game.
Yeah.
Please make sure everyone understands it's fiction and that it's just things that exist on paper and in your mind.
When you start dealing with gruesome kind of stuff like this, you want to make sure that everybody is on the same page when it comes to the depictions and descriptions and so forth that are involved. And the kind of open conversation and ongoing conversation about the nature of the game and what people want out of it is an important one.
Yes.
And so as the GM, when you are planning adventures and doing stuff that is involved with this organization, you want to keep those boundaries or potential boundaries in mind.
Agreed. So that warning out of the way, it is time for us to go, folks. So feel free to keep the keys of death away from your legend.
Good night, everybody.